This man had a tough job for 30 years. He had to sit close to some people in Hollywood who did not smell good. Every night, he was around them, breathing the air and being in the same space. He still managed to stay calm and not get upset even when things got really bad. The things he went through would have made most people want to get out of there fast as they could. He had to deal with Hollywood personalities who did not take care of themselves. It was hard for him. This man was able to keep his cool even when he was around these Hollywood personalities all the time. Here are the real stories that the people in charge at NBC did not want you to know about. The things that Johnny Carson had to deal with to make people laugh. These are not funny stories. These are disturbing facts about what really went on when the cameras were not filming and the smell got so bad that even Johnny Carson, who was great at his job, could not handle it. Johnny Carson had to put up with a lot of things, and what happened to Johnny Carson is really shocking. The television studios we see today are really clean and nice. When Carson was working, it was a totally different story. The first 20 years he was on the job were pretty bad. The air in the studio was not good for you all. It was like a fog that had bad stuff in it, like chemicals that can cause cancer. The people who worked there for a time called it celebrity soup, which is a pretty gross name. The studio was full of smoke. It was not a safe place to be. Former NBC page Thomas Wilson says that if we had the rules back then that we do now, the studio would have been closed down for not being safe. Carson had to deal with this environment for a long time. The studios were really hazardous, which is a way of saying they were not good for the people who worked there. Carson and the people who worked with him had to put up with this environment, which is just what it sounds like. Really bad and unhealthy. Celebrities would smoke a lot before they were interviewed. They kept on smoking when they were on the show. When they left, they would leave behind a bad smell of nicotine. This smell would get on the furniture, the clothes, people, the equipment they used. The celebrities and their smoking habit was a problem. The smell of nicotine from the celebrities was really bad. The situation got really bad when people who smoked tobacco also had strong personal smells. Betty Davis, who was at the studio a lot, made what the crew called the Davis Cloud. This was a bad mix of the smoke from her cigarettes, her strong perfume, and the smell of bourbon on her breath. It actually changed the air in the studio. Set decorator Marion Lewis said that after Betty Davis was there, they had to use fans to blow out the bad air between tapings of the show. The tobacco. The other smells that Betty Davis had were a big problem. The Davis Cloud was something that the crew did not like all. The smell of her stayed around for a long time. People who came over after her would ask if she was still there even when she had been gone for a while. It was like her being had left a mark on the things in the room. Number 5. Buddy Hackett. Buddy Hackett was a problem for The Tonight Show. He was on the show then 100 times and people loved him because he was funny and had a lot of crazy stories to tell. What people did not see was that Buddy Hackett had some issues. He had a lot of saliva in his mouth. He did not care about getting too close to other people. Buddy Hackett was a comedy legend. People liked him, but Buddy Hackett also had some weird habits that were not funny at all. The Tonight Show had Buddy Hackett on the show times, and he always made people laugh, but behind the scenes, Buddy Hackett was a little scary. The staff would talk about something they called the splash zone. This was the area around Hackett. By the time he was done, this area would be wet. The staff would whisper about the splash zone in a scared way. They were horrified by what would happen to the area around Hackett. The splash zone was a place that would get wet because of Hackett. What is really surprising about this situation is that Carson kept asking Hackett to come on the show even after all the bad things that happened. This was not about being professional. It showed that Carson thought that making television was more important than how he felt. One time, after a difficult interview, Carson made a joke to Ed McMahon. He said that he should get an award for being brave and that he should also get extra money for dealing with a tough interview. Carson really believed that great television sometimes required him to put up with people like Hackett. The crew had to come up with ways to deal with the Hackett aftermath. They even had a towel that they used just for drying the host's desk and chair after Buddy left the stage. This was because Buddy would often make a mess. The crew used this towel for the host's desk and chair to clean up the Hackett aftermath. Number 4. Rip Taylor, the human geyser. Rip Taylor was famous for throwing paper scraps at people when he was on television, which is why people called him the king of confetti. He always had a lot of energy when he was on TV. One time he went on The Tonight Show in 1977, and it became a really big deal for the people who worked there. This was not because it was a show, but because something really gross happened. When Rip Taylor got to the studio, you could tell something was not right with him. He was sweating a lot, which what the people in charge said in their papers. The people who were actually there said it was much worse than that. The guy looked like he was literally falling apart because of some really strong stuff he took. Samuel Peterson, the person in charge of the lights, said that in 40 years of working in television, he had never seen anything like this. Taylor was not just sweating a lot, he was actually dripping with sweat. By the time he got to the couch, you could see that his entire body was covered in a layer of sweat. Every single part of his skin that was showing was shiny and wet. Carson had a reaction that the viewers did not see. Some staff members noticed it. When Taylor first went to shake hands with Johnny waited for a bit of time before he shook hands. This short wait said a lot to the people who know about Johnny's fear of germs. The cameras did not show what happened next. Carson quietly wiped his hand on the bottom of the desk after shaking hands with Taylor. The floor director, Thomas Allen, said that Johnny's hand was really wet after the handshake. Carson's face looked really scared for a moment. Then he got control of himself again. Looked calm like he always does. The interview was going on. It was getting really bad. The lights in the studio were very hot. Taylor was sweating a lot. His shirt was made of polyester. It was getting wetter and wetter. You could see the color of the shirt change on camera. It was light blue. Then it turned into a deep navy blue because it was soaking up so much sweat. The worst part was when Taylor suddenly jumped up from a seat in the middle of telling a story to act out a scene. The camera caught this weird thing. It was like water spraying. One of the guys who works the camera said it was like a sprinkler. The water drops were shining in the studio lights for a second. You could see the water falling down onto Carson's desk. It was so strange that Ed McMahon said he almost lost it on television. The whole thing with the water was really disturbing. Carson's desk was getting wet from the water droplets. Number 3. Orson Welles, the human hothouse. When Orson Welles started going on The Tonight Show a lot in the 1970s, he did not look like the man who made Citizen Kane. Orson Welles was not skinny anymore. He was really big. That was very noticeable. Orson Welles was still very good at making movies and coming up with ideas. His body had gotten really big. This made it very hard to keep him clean. The people who worked on The Tonight Show had to do some special things to keep Orson Welles clean when he was on the show. They had never had to do anything like that before for any guest. Orson Welles needed a lot of help because of his size. Orson Welles was a big guy, over 6 feet tall and more than 300 pounds. When he sat under the studio lights, something weird happened. The crew called it the Orson effect. It was like a change in the weather that happened right there in the studio. The Orson effect would happen within minutes of Orson Welles sitting under those lights. The guy was really big. He wore a lot of dark clothes to try to make himself look smaller. The lights were super hot, and that made him sweat a lot. This was really bad for Carson because he liked things to be clean and neat. Harold Barnes used to work with the equipment on sets. He said that Welles was so hot that you could measure the heat coming from him. He said it was 7 degrees hotter near Welles. Sitting next to Welles was like sitting to a furnace. The heat from Welles made him sweat a lot. That made him smell bad. The smell was what you would think it would be when someone sweats that much. People did not see how Orson Welles looked worse and worse when he was on television. Usually, he looked pretty good when he first got there. After 15 minutes of talking, he looked really bad. His special shirts, which were made to absorb sweat, would get so wet that they looked different on camera. You could tell that Carson, the host, was trying to be professional. He was also really grossed out by Orson Welles. Sometimes the microphones would pick up Carson quietly smelling the air after Orson Welles made movements, with his arms, because Orson Welles had a strong smell that people could notice when he moved around. The people who made the show often wrote notes that said Johnny needed room for Orson's part. They did not really explain what that meant. It was a bit mysterious. The notes just said that Johnny needed space for Orson's segment. Number 2. Truman Capote, Chemical Warfare. Truman Capote was a deal in literature when he was young. He went on The Tonight Show a lot, and people saw how he changed over time. In the 1960s, Truman Capote looked really put together and fancy. By the mid-1970s, he was a totally different person. The people who worked on The Tonight Show would talk about Truman Capote in tones and call him the Chemical Man. When Truman Capote was going to be on the show, it took a lot of work to get him ready for the camera. The people who did his makeup had a time making him look good because his skin had a gray color that they could not completely cover up. They called this the Truman Capote Challenge. The man's eyes were usually very red. It was really bad. He did not take care of himself like he used to, so he needed ways to make himself look a little better. His hygiene was so bad that these special techniques were necessary just to hide the worst of it. The man's eyes and hygiene were problems, and the man's eyes were often very red. The staff used some methods to make Truman Capote look better. They called it the Capote. This was a process. It included using a lot of concealer to cover up the broken blood vessels on his face. They also used extra-strength powder to soak up the oil that kept coming. The thing that was really disturbing was the special cologne they made to hide the smell of someone who had been drinking for days. When Carson saw Truman Capote on his show, at that time he was professional. You could tell he was uncomfortable. The people who worked on the show would make jokes about Truman Capote. They would say he looked like someone who had just been pulled out of a shipwreck. Truman Capote really did look like that. Number 1. Charles Bukowski, Biohazard Alert. Johnny Carson was really good at being on television. Charles Bukowski was the complete opposite. He was a poet and novelist who people called the laureate of lowlife. When he went on The Tonight Show, he brought his unique style with him. This style was pretty rough around the edges. The thing that made Charles Bukowski's appearance on the show in 1975 famous was not just that he looked a little messy. It was because he smelled bad. This smell was so bad that it caused problems for the people who worked behind the scenes at NBC. They even had to look at their contract to see what to do about working in bad conditions. Charles Bukowski's smell was a deal. When Bukowski showed up, people were really shocked. It looked like he had been trying to make himself feel really bad. The people who did his makeup wrote down what happened when they met him. They were very honest about it. They said he smelled bad, there were weird things in his hair, his skin had a weird coating on it, and his breath was so bad that he might need to see a doctor. The truth is that Bukowski had been drinking nonstop for 2 days at some rough bars in Los Angeles. He did not just show up unready, he was actually getting worse by the minute. Bukowski was in shape, and it was clear that Bukowski had not taken care of himself.